Hello, everyone. Before I begin, the views expressed in this podcast are my personal views and do not reflect those of any employer, university, research institution, funding body, or collaborator. Participation by guests does not imply endorsement of my views, nor does my hosting imply endorsement of theirs.
Welcome to the Might Ramble podcast.
Ron, tell us about that.
Not two, not three, not four, not five.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest.
We're going to start here. You're 20 years old. You're back at the University of Minnesota. I think you're maybe a sophomore.
Mm-hmm.
In Minnesota, winter lasts like 6 out of the 12 months, so maybe like 50% of the year.
Yeah.
So it's cold, gray, it's like shitty out. And I come to you, I have truth serum, and I go, Brittanie, what's wrong? There's no UNC at this point. There's no PhD program.
Mm-hmm.
There's no computational biology. There's no mentors. There's no reading papers and conferences or just academia. What does 20-year-old Brittanie say?
Oh man, I think 20-year-old Brittanie would have a lot to say about what's wrong. I think around 20, that's the beginning of the end of my year 20 was the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I turned 21 during COVID-19. So I think there was a lot.
What's COVID?
COVID-19?
I'm just kidding.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, so I think there was a lot going on in that area. I think there was a lot of personal exploration starting for me, but I guess what was wrong? How did I feel at 20? Just kind of confused. I don't feel like I had a great sense of self, or maybe I had a sense of self that I was longing for, or I was kind of like making up in a way
Sure.
to fill the missing pieces that I had going on during that time in my life.
Like feeling a void of some sort, but you didn't have the language or you didn't know where to look as far as what was going on, or perhaps even the recognition, right, that there might have been some type of like void going on of things that you later have found out were worth addressing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think part of my way of addressing that void was being very controlled and disciplined, and I think that was a time of my life where I had gone vegan, I had gone gluten-free, or I was exploring gluten-free, and I was trying all of these things to try to gain some level of control over my daily life.
And also just be a normal college student.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So I think there was a lot going on.
I can go first a little bit. When I was 20 years old, I was a college dropout at that time,
Okay.
right? I'd had some struggles with some things that I found out were later worth addressing, similar to you. I was just about to start at the U of M, and I didn't even know what I wanted to do. Last time I had been in college, I think I was in like business school or something.
And you were at Iowa State?
The University of
Iowa
different.
before that.
Very different.
Okay,
Right.
yeah. Hawkeyes versus Cyclones.
And what's your undergrad degree in?
My undergrad degree is in microbiology. So I
Okay.
started in neuroscience and then transitioned over to microbiology my sophomore year, I believe.
Now you're at UNC Chapel Hill.
Yeah.
You're in a
yeah.
PhD program.
Yep. Yeah, so the PhD program that I'm a part of is called the Biological and Biomedical Sciences program. It's an umbrella program that captures, I don't know, maybe like 12 different programs. And within that, I started within the Genetics and Molecular Biology program. And after a semester of doing that, I was like, I think I can get what I need out of the Computational Biology and Bioinformatics program, where we do a lot of like computer science and computational biology to be able to answer health-related questions.
And did you ever find this surprising? Because as a person, I know you to be quite a go-getter and quite on your feet and doing things. But then when I think about something like computational biology, it's not that far adjacent in my head to something like, say, physics or math, right, where you're like rather seated. You're not doing wet lab work. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your journey and how you ended up along this path of being a quite advanced, computational biologist?
Yeah, I think maybe a lot of people have this experience where they are in a stats class in undergrad and you get exposed to like Python or R in the stats class, and I hated it. Like I was like, this is not my forte. It was just like a lot. You have to like learn a whole new language. And then I became really interested in microbiome science, and I quickly learned that if I wanted to be able to study microbiome science and to be able to analyze my own data, I was going to have to learn how to code and how to do stats. And I got really fortunate to be accepted as a paid researcher, which is like really not heard of for undergrads. It was an ag-based lab, so they were studying the microbiomes of turkeys and chickens and under different circumstances.
A lot of turkeys at UMN.
And they gave me the freedom and the opportunity to take an entire summer to teach myself how to code and how to work with big data and microbiome data at that. So that's like 16S sequencing, and it was a huge learning curve, but then I really loved it. I'm a puzzle person. I like Sudoku, and to me, like, coding is a little bit like that, and you get that instant gratification too. You can run a line of code and you know if it's going to work or not.
You do get the feedback, but it can be a lot of work before you like finally hit send on the code,
Oh,
right?
yeah, for sure. So I think there was a lot of different things that kind of played into my passion for coding. And then I actually ended up, after undergrad, I didn't really know. I knew that I was probably going to want to go for another degree, but wasn't sure. And I ended up at 3M in a genomics laboratory there where I knew I was going to be doing only wet lab work. And so I did 2 years of just molecular biology and like sequencing technology and genomics in that lab, all hands-on, no computational work at all. And then when I got to UNC, I was like, okay, I want to pick up the computational biology, get back into coding a little bit. And then I had the opportunity to do that, and I was like, this is great. And I love the flexibility that I get to have and the freedom to kind of work at my own pace and the independence that it offers. And I never wanted to be stuck at a bench running like time course analyses.
We're very different. I love the bench.
Yeah, so. I enjoyed the bench when I was at 3M doing the genomics work. It was a huge learning curve, but I learned so much there, and it gives me this comprehensive view of I can understand how a blood sample goes from you collect the sample to this processing to the sequencing to, you know, getting the data loaded onto my computer, and so I feel like it helped me develop this full picture. But
yeah, let's go back a little bit. So you grew up in a small town.
Yes.
In Minnesota, I think.
Yes.
And my understanding is you're not from a family that probably had a lot of higher ed degrees.
Correct. Yeah.
So you're kind of a trailblazer, not even kind of. You're a trailblazer within your family, right?
Yeah, I was definitely I excelled in school. I was very nerdy. I was also the person at every parent-teacher conference. They were like, she talks too much. So there was this combination of wanting to talk a lot, but also like cared a lot about my grades. Like I remember being in middle school and being like, I need a 4.0 so I can get into college. Like what fifth grader is thinking about that? But I definitely was, and that really motivated me throughout high school. And I was nerdy in the sense that I was really good at memorizing things, but I think sitting down and wanting to fully understand how something worked and the curiosity aspect developed later on in my intellectual career. I was more focused on, I need to learn this, I need to get a good grade, I need to get into college, and then the intellectual desire and pursuit to fully grasp an idea, I think, took a little bit longer.
Do you have like a specific memory or period of time, maybe once you were in your undergrad, where the lights went on of, oh, I am curious about that, and thinking about education perhaps differently?
Yeah, I think it was definitely like the microbiome-focused work. Neuroscience did it for me a little bit, but I think when I was still on the side of studying the neuroscience degree, it was still more in that memorization phase, but I went through this phase of my life where I was very interested in human optimization and how can I be as healthy as possible, and microbiome science was kind of at the forefront of that in like 2020, 2019, and what's happening at our gut and how do microbes in our gut affect our health outcomes, and that's what really kind of catapulted me into the microbiome research, and that really like sparked my desire to want to understand how our biology is affected by outside circumstances. You know, like if you eat something and that something happened, like does something in your gut, how does that affect the way that you feel? How does that affect the way you perform? And so a lot of curiosity was kind of like sparked just around human health, probably around the age of 20.
Around the age of 20. It's a formative time of life.
It is.
It only took me until, the end of my 20s to perhaps start coming together as whatever adult baby I've been. But, so I think there's often this notion, say you're in therapy, you're sitting down with a psychologist, you're talking about something that happened in the past that doesn't quite sit right with you, or maybe they're helping you understand that, oh, you were treated in this way and this wasn't right, and this is how we need to think about this, and this is how we should behave differently, moving forward, like that process of work. We think about something like that, or say what you eat, or say what you're watching for shows or reading for books or how you sleep as somehow not entirely connected to like the physiology that's going on in your body, right? If I watch a particular thing, maybe it makes me feel a certain way, but I don't think the common notion would be that it's affecting my biology. Now, your work currently, that's what it's all about, right? As far as these external things resulting in biological signal.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could walk us through overarching what you study currently at UNC, and we'll start there.
Yeah, I think what I study and how I think about the way that our life experiences, and it's funny that you brought up like watching a TV show, because there's like certain like scenes on TV shows that like I won't watch it because I know I will have a physiological response to it, and I'll have to like tend to that physiological response and like kind of be in an activated state. So like altogether I'll be like, I'll plug my ears, I won't hear it because I'll try to avoid that.
I'll interject here. This was a very surprising, when you get traumatized by something and you end up with, like, say, something like PTSD, some form of PTSD, which I most definitely have, it has effects you did not see coming in terms of this type of thing.
Yeah.
I went and saw a scary movie not too long after my PTSD diagnosis, and normally I'm totally fine with tons of content, and it completely triggered me, right? And I no longer listen to, say, like, true crime podcasts and stuff like that. I had very different responses, and so I guess I want to say I get it.
Yeah, I feel like there's a level of sensitivity within the system that turns on when you have PTSD or complex PTSD. Like, there's just, your body responds in a different way. And once you become aware of that and aware of those signals, it's kind of hard to become unaware of them again. But yeah, to go back to answer your question of exactly like what is it that I'm studying at UNC, I am a grad student in Dr. Sarah Linnstaedt's lab at UNC, and her overarching mission, or the overarching mission of the lab, is to improve the lives of trauma survivors. And we do that it's a very translational lab, so we've had cell culture work, we've had animal work, we've had human cohort work, so we kind of hit it all different angles.
What do you mean by translational?
So that's bringing something from like the bench side. So let's say we have a certain cell of interest and we want to know how certain genes get affected. If you treat that cell with cortisol or norepinephrine, what genes turn on, what genes turn off in that cell type. But then we also can carry it through to animal models. So it's like, okay, well now how do we therapeutically modulate these responses within an animal, let's say giving them some sort of compound that inhibits a molecule of interest, and how does that inhibition affect their behavior? And then we actually do have a clinical trial in the works right now too, but we then carry that into like human cohort analyses, or we've got blood data, or we've got data that we've been able to extract from blood samples, and being able to map what have we learned at the bench side to what are we seeing within these human cohorts and at the human population level. And because there's also been some findings in our lab of certain compounds that might improve recovery following a traumatic experience, we have clinical trials. We currently have a clinical trial in the works. We're in the process of getting it running, but it's going to happen pretty soon. It's called the PEACE trial. And
Is that an acronym?
Yeah, you know what? It is an acronym, and I don't know what it stands for.
That's okay.
But essentially, it's going to be, if someone experiences a sexual assault, let's say a rape, and they come into the hospital, they are eligible, as long as they meet some other criteria, to take a estrogen pill. And we want to track whether or not this estrogen pill, or estradiol, improves recovery over time, or do the people that receive this estradiol, are they less likely to develop PTSD versus the people that don't receive estradiol? So we're in the pilot study for that right now, to kind of carry what we've learned through the mechanistic studies and the human cohort studies actually into implementing something translational where we might have a therapeutic that could improve the quality of life of trauma survivors.
And prior to intervention, first you've had to have had a sufficient type of data in people, right, that has been suggestive of, say, hey, these are biological markers of what we've deemed as recovery, right? Versus a different phenotype where people do not recover, right? And then some type of intervention, say in the form of an estradiol pill for one person who has been acutely traumatized, our data suggests that this may shift the biological outcomes in this way, and those biological outcomes correlate with this person being diagnosed with something like PTSD less frequently.
Yeah, well said.
I'm just making sure I follow. But your work that suggests, hey, we have an idea here that recovery, perhaps we can quantify it in this type of situation. Because when we think of something, if someone, say, does get sexually assaulted and raped or gets in a bad car accident, right, they have experienced a trauma, and perhaps we can't quite say that they've been traumatized by it yet, but they've most certainly experienced a trauma. So when we talk about something traumatizing someone, we have a hard time having objective, tangible measurements of what does that actually mean that someone has been traumatized by something. We can see if something really bad has happened, right? It's not hard to identify at least certain forms of a trauma. Say if someone, goes to war, we understand that they've been through a trauma. That's not hard to figure out. What we haven't been able to do is to figure out, okay, how does something that we've deemed in the realm of psychology as a trauma, how does that actually manifest biologically? What is happening, right?
Yeah.
And so I was wondering if you could hop in a bit there as far as how do we think about attempting to, say, quantify how traumatizing was something?
Yeah, I think there's first kind of like a terminology aspect to it where trauma can mean a couple of different things. I think depending on who you're talking to, let's say like a emergency room physician or something, like trauma can mean like there was major bodily injury that required a surgical intervention of some sort. So there's like trauma in that sense. There's trauma as people say, like I experienced a trauma, kind of as you were just wording it now, and that's like I think of that more as like a traumatic event, a traumatic stress exposure, a life-threatening experience. Trauma itself. The word as trauma is the way that I like to understand it as trauma being a internal biological process as your response to the traumatic event that you experienced. So it's the way that your body processes in this active biological process of how your body moves through the response to the traumatic event, if that makes sense. And I think that's how you can start to conceptualize it a little bit more at the biological level, because you have this life-threatening experience happen. Like your body, your brain is like, wow, like I could die right now, or wow, I just experienced or saw something that was so scary that I have to turn on all of my stress signaling. I have to release cortisol, our body's main stress hormone, and that kind of creates this cascade of biological events. And at the biological level, because there are so many facets to recovery, or to the molecular level of recovery, which is where my interest lies, and is what a lot of my research has involved the past 2 years at UNC.
Going from the realm of psychology, right?
Yes.
To finding the biological correlates to what has traditionally been the realm of psychology, particularly regarding trauma.
Yes, and like what does a healthy biological response look like, and what is that characterized by? Like what are all of the key players involved in that recovery response at the molecular level, and what is different between the people that do recover from the traumatic stress experience that they endured, and the people that go on to develop chronic post-traumatic symptoms such as chronic pain or PTSD or depression, anxiety.
What was that P acronym?
PTSD?
No, it was like adverse.
Oh, adverse post-traumatic neuropsychiatric sequelae. That's how we call it APNS in our work.
It's like the type of academia acronym where it's like, okay, you guys are speaking a foreign language. But
Yeah. I kind of had a bit of an aversion using that acronym at first, so I try not to say it too much in natural conversation, but I definitely write it all the time. It's very present in my paper.
Why did you have an aversion to it?
Because it is such a big word, and I feel like I had struggled saying the word sequelae,
Okay.
and I was kind of insecure about how to say sequelae for a long time. And I think people just say it differently. But I feel like it kind of, you can also just say like post-traumatic symptoms or like adverse health outcomes. And I think that lands a little bit easier for a lay audience because people understand PTSD, at least like they understand that PTSD is a response to a traumatic event, or people understand chronic pain.
And
that,
somehow someone's been changed, and it's like
yes,
serious, right?
Yeah, like I think most people understand that a traumatic event changes the body or changes the person at some level, and people understand anxiety, depression. So I like to veer a little bit away from APNS, but
you know it, yeah.
Yeah, but I know it, and ultimately, if our main goal is to be able to understand at the molecular level why some people recover and other people don't, and
in the wake of a trauma.
In the wake of a trauma, and this is super important because like statistics and people suggest or hypothesize that nearly every single person is going to experience a traumatic event in their lifetime, and that's pretty substantial, right? That
we all have stuff. We all got some scars.
Yeah,
right?
and we're all going to be faced with a life-threatening experience at some point. And while most people are able to recover from that and they might not develop PTSD or chronic pain, there's a substantial subset of the population that doesn't recover, and they go on to develop these adverse health outcomes. And we need to be able to understand why that happens and what are the risk factors and what at the biological level is different between these two populations of people.
Yeah, I mean, if we understand the biological correlates, right, of these people ended up not traumatized from a trauma, and these people did end up traumatized from a trauma. If we understand those biological correlates, we then can take interventions, say, I think you've had some experiencing with somatic experiencing, right, that, you know, we haven't had biological correlates beyond someone saying, this really helped me, right? And being able to understand if there are these two cohorts, right, of people that don't end up traumatized, people that do end up traumatized, and then taking, you know, listen to your patients, right? And someone saying, hey, something like somatic experiencing really helped me. And then you take that and you say, does this match biological correlates we've identified, right, in these cohorts? And so, yeah, so I know you have a study going on currently.
Yep.
And you're, I don't know if I want to say on the cusp of what could be a pretty impactful paper in your career. Now, the thing about a paper in academia is, I've heard many times, like, paper's about to happen, and then it's like, you don't see the paper for until another 2 years. So I'm not saying that's going to be the case, but I know that you're at the point where you have a draft.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could take us through your study, like your patient cohort, and then what has gone on here as far as what are the outlines of this, what you now have as a draft?
Yeah, I would love to do this. I love talking about my
walk me through
research, especially having a draft come together. It's definitely been on the forefront of my mind.
I've read some of it. I didn't want to read too much because I want to be able to ask questions, like, you know, the scientific idiot I can be at times. So
Yeah. So I think, well, to begin, we focus on a cohort called the AURORA cohort, and this is a population of people that they experience a traumatic event, and that traumatic event brings them into the emergency department. Let's say like a motor vehicle collision, so a car crash, or maybe it's a physical assault, maybe it's a natural disaster. It kind of covers an array of different life-threatening experiences. And upon coming into the ED, these participants can't have any major bodily injury, so we want to really be able to study the psychological impact of experiencing the trauma, not necessarily the recovery from an injury that occurred during the trauma. So only people that have minor injuries, because of course, you have a car accident, you're likely going to experience some bruising and some level of injury, but relatively minor.
What was the exact thinking there as far as excluding people with major bodily injuries? Like, I get the, you know, we're not interested in how someone's, say, leg that's been severely damaged, like how that heals, right? We're interested in what's going on up here. But still, I guess there would be the scenario, right, where if something terrible happened to someone's leg, yes, the leg itself would have its own healing process, but you could still study up here. So I guess I'm curious to just dig a little deeper on that in terms of like why that might be excluded.
Yeah, I can't speak for sure. I'm not like I wasn't ever involved on the creation of this cohort. It actually, I believe, was published in 2020 or 2019. So people before my time were definitely working on it. But I think the main idea is that disentangling the factor of the healing response towards a large bodily injury, pulling out signal that comes from the psychological impacts might be a little bit more challenging when the body also has all of these processes that are engaging in the recovery of tissue damage. So I think it was more of trying to have one less thing to confound the analyses, or to like bias the analyses in the way. So they're trying to separate that.
And so people come into the emergency department, they've had some form of trauma. What's like the time window here that they have to make it into the ER?
Yeah, so they have to come to the ER within 72 hours, which is, that window is there to allow eligibility for multiple people to come, or like to allow a wider range of people to be allowed to come in. For instance, if someone was raped or physically abused, they might not come in immediately, but over time they might come in a couple days later. And for most of our cohort, most of the cohort is a motor vehicle collision. So a lot of people that experience a car crash are coming into the ER pretty quickly. Like, you don't wait a couple of days after a car crash and think, okay, now I'm going to go in.
Yeah, you're like,
so,
I probably should get checked out.
Yeah, let's go get checked out
hurts,
and just do this right away. So even though the window is 72 hours, I would say most people probably come in within that first 24 hours of experiencing a traumatic event. And what's really cool about the AURORA design is that we end up taking tons of surveys. So by surveys, I mean we get all their demographic data, like where do you live, what is your BMI, how old are you, what's your gender, like all of those basic things. And we ask a few other questions at the time, but we also get blood samples. And then we follow their story for another year. So there's multiple checkup points within AURORA where people will come in 2 weeks later, they give another blood sample, they ask or they answer other types of questionnaires. For example, the ones that I'm most interested in are early life adversity based questionnaires, or childhood trauma questionnaires, or just lifetime trauma questionnaires. And of course, you don't want to ask those on the day that someone comes into the emergency department following a traumatic exposure. So you want to wait a few weeks and see if they still want to stay enrolled, and they come back and start to bring up these things that might be a little bit heavier at that time point.
Digging deeper.
Yeah, they already have so much going on when they first arrive to the ED. So I'm really happy that was how the design of the study was.
As far as looking at some of these experiences that predated this new trauma, and it sounds like a lot of them have been car crashes. So there is something called adverse childhood experiences, right? There's like ACE. An ACE score. And I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but if you were to look at someone's ACE score, there might be like 10 possible. I can't remember. It's something like that, right? But the more that you go up in terms of checking these boxes of like, yes, my parents got divorced, right? Yes, I had a parent that had a drug addiction, et cetera, et cetera. The higher your ACE score, the way that this correlates with future mental health outcomes is absolutely insane and just completely staggering when you look at the statistics. But there are people with high ACE scores that end up perfectly fine until something happens, right? So do you want to walk me through a little bit of the thinking of why are these experiences prior to the trauma that brought them to the ER, why are they interesting?
Yeah, definitely. So with the ACE study, like they were really able to connect at the population level. The more adversity that you've experienced in your life, specifically in childhood, where a lot of developmental processes are happening and you're kind of forming your sense of self and a sense of safety. If you have a lot of these experiences or adverse experiences, you're more likely not to just develop mental health outcomes. You're also more likely to have cardiovascular disease and physical symptoms such as chronic pain as well. So it's a very large risk factor. And it's really interesting within the work that I do because one of our main findings, which is generally accepted within the psychological field or the psychiatry field, is that these individuals that do have early life adversity and they experience a traumatic event and that brings them to the ED, and we get to look at their molecular biology, what mechanisms are getting turned on and what are getting turned off, it looks different from the people that end up recovering. So these people that have early life adversity, it's a risk factor because they're less likely to recover from an acute traumatic event in adulthood. So that means like they don't mount the same biological response that a quote unquote like healthier person might have.
I want to pause here for a sec. So, person comes in ER, I take their blood. What am I looking for in their blood, and why am I looking for it? Like, why these things?
Yeah, definitely. So taking a blood sample is just one form of the way that the AURORA cohort has been able to collect data. They also do like neuroimaging and MRIs, but that's not the stuff that I'm focused on. I'm really focused on the immune system and the hormone system. And a lot of our immune system is captured within our bloodstream, within our whole blood cells, red blood cells, plasma cells, a lot of it's there. So when you take a blood sample, you're able to extract RNA from that blood sample. And RNA is a great tool for assessing a biological snapshot of a specific moment in time, because RNA is transient, which means it responds to a stimuli pretty quickly. Like if you're experiencing stress, your RNA expression is going to start changing relatively quickly in an adaptive response or in a healthy response. So we're able to extract this RNA and be able to look at it, and it's really great because when we get their blood sample 2 weeks and 6 months later, we can compare what genes were turned on and off at the ED, what was turned on and off at 2 weeks, and what was turned on and off at 6 months.
So it's not necessarily person A has more RNA in their blood than person B, but you're looking at the particularities of, hey, these light switches went on and these ones went down, or maybe nothing changed, right? Or this one went up and over here didn't change. And
yeah, and that's a really cool aspect to our cohort and our research specifically, because in a lot of PTSD-focused research or chronic pain-focused research, they do a lot of control case studies. So like at one time point, you compare what do the the people that develop PTSD, what does their biology look like compared to the people that do recover? And you're looking at a single time point. What's really cool about our analysis is that we've got these longitudinal data points, so we can use survey data to group participants into this person recovered and this person didn't recover. And you're using survey data, so it has nothing to do with biology, just clinical presentation and what that person is experiencing. And you group them into these categories, and then now we've got a statistical design that works really nicely because you have a stratified cohort of these are the people that recover over time, these are the people that don't, and now you can do within class paired analyses to be able to track their changes over time. And with that design, you're able to see how things are changing, and that is the most powerful aspect, I would say, of our research, because we're seeing that the people that do recover, they mount this huge transcriptional response, like tens, or maybe not 10,000, but like 6,000 genes at the ED time point, so right after trauma, look completely different than at 2 weeks.
And just to pause for a sec.
Yes.
So we're taking, say, at the end, right? I think it's longitudinal data that goes maybe up to a year with some time points within there. We're saying at the end, this person was okay.
Mm-hmm.
Life went back to normal of some sort. I mean, life is always in flux, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we would say that's healthy, right?
Yep.
This other person, they didn't have some major bodily injury, but now they have, say, PTSD from it, right?
Yeah.
Is that that's the not healthy cohort?
Yeah, that would be like the unresolved cohort, or like the persistent cohort, where they came in, they were experiencing pain, and that pain persisted over time versus resolving over time.
Yep.
Because most people that come in after a car accident, they're going to report that they have some level of pain at the ED. So we're interested in the people that they start at the same pain level, who recovers, by 6 months or a year and who doesn't recover. Their pain persists.
I see. So it's not necessarily PTSD. You're looking for still the presence of what they're experiencing as pain.
Yeah, so another really cool aspect to our paper is that we're not looking at just one outcome, we're looking at 10 different outcomes. So a lot of papers will study just PTSD, or maybe within PTSD there's 3 kind of like symptom clusters of hyperarousal, avoidance, and re-experiencing. So hyperarousal, hypervigilance, avoidance, you don't really want to talk about it. You might have some social isolation, and re-experiencing, that's going to be your flashbacks.
Yeah.
So you have papers that will study just one of those. You'll have papers that study all 3 of those. You'll have papers that study sleep disturbances. But what's really cool about the paper that we're working on is that there is a known consensus that a lot of these post-traumatic outcomes are comorbid. So that means if you have one, let's say chronic pain, you're more likely to also have PTSD, and you're more likely to have anxiety and depression. They don't happen in isolation very often. So there's a lot of overlap in the diagnoses of these 10 different outcomes.
Yeah, our boundaries that we define as various, particularly psychiatric conditions, right? We have boundaries, yes, but they seem to overlap so much that it's, perhaps not representative of a lot of shared underlying biology there, right?
Yeah, and the thing is that there is a ton of shared underlying biology to it. Like that's what that was kind of like a general hypothesis. But we're showing that like the same biological pathways that are being activated in the people that recover from chronic pain or from pain are the same pathways that allow people to recover or not develop PTSD or sleep issues or somatic symptoms. So the mechanisms that promote recovery for all of these outcomes it's a very shared biological response, and similar to the people that do end up developing these outcomes, chronic pain, PTSD, their response is also a shared response. It's a lack of a response essentially, or a dysregulated response.
Which is interesting. Analogy-wise here, I guess what's coming to mind for me is the people that end up recovering. Essentially, you may have some different branches depending on the individual and depending on the specifics, right, of what exactly occurred. But they largely share the same trunk of the tree, is what it appears to be, right? There's probably more information to be found,
for
right?
sure,
but for where you're looking, it looks like there's a shared trunk of a tree. The same for the people that are not recovering. It looks like, they've got a pretty shared chunk of the tree, right? And I do want to pause here, though, in that you've mentioned that, okay, trauma occurs, they end up in the ER, and for the people that end up recovering, they have what seems like a pretty active response, right? There's a lot going on biologically, right? And when we tend to think of a trauma and people that they were able to just kind of go on pretty similar to how they were before, like it was no big deal, right? And what you're saying is for those people that end up just fine, there's actually more going on biologically, right? We think of just being fine, but it's like actually it seems that there's more going on biologically than for the people that end up not okay.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it.
And we think about the people that are not okay as more going on with them. But what you're saying is that biologically you're seeing less going on with them, or something stalled.
Yeah, at least with the time points that we have to be able to study the individuals that end up not fine or end up with these symptoms, because we don't have a baseline to these individuals. So I'd maybe argue that if one of these individuals came into the ED and we were able to somehow have a blood sample the day before they experience a traumatic stress exposure, and we were able to compare the person that doesn't recover to the person that recovers a day before they experience a traumatic stress exposure, I would expect to see more going on in the person that doesn't recover, because we know that the people that don't recover, we have these correlates and the associations that we show within my analyses and also a lot of other researchers, that the people that don't recover or develop these chronic outcomes, they have low-grade inflammation. So their body is constantly kind of keeping an inflamed state. They are maybe releasing cortisol, our body's main stress hormone, at a higher level than someone that does end up recovering.
Does that correlate with, I think you had mentioned earlier that at some point You go back and dig deeper, right? Prior to the trauma, what were these people's life experiences? So what, I guess, does that correlate? Let's say someone's, quote unquote, taken more hits before. Like, what does that look like in the day before that this new trauma occurs?
Yeah, the body is going to have, there's going to be a different biological landscape in people that have early life adversity and higher levels of chronic stress burden. And that's because you can think about when your body's trying to protect you, it's really an adaptive response. Like, it's trying to protect you. So when you're growing up and you're being exposed to childhood trauma, or maybe you're living in a highly disadvantaged area, or you have some level of neglect happening or bullying, your body is trying to protect you. So it says, we're going to start releasing cortisol more often, and that's going to increase our heart rate. That's going to keep us a little bit more hypervigilant. That's going to allow us to think on our toes a little bit more, and maybe in another system. And because cortisol is part of a pathway that leads to inflammation, the higher levels of cortisol that you have in your body circulating, the higher levels of inflammation you are likely going to have. So you can imagine at a young age, that is kind of part of the neurodevelopmental process, or just the developmental process in general. And I say neuro because the HPA axis includes, it's your hypothalamus, your pituitary gland, and your adrenal gland. And two of those pieces are in your brain, and the other pieces in a different organ. So the way that your body has to adapt to be able to survive those conditions shapes your biology, and that shape of your biology is a risk factor for developing symptoms following an acute trauma event in adulthood, because your body says, I've been releasing cortisol my whole life. Like I got into a car accident. That's not that stressful. I don't need to release a big surge of cortisol now. And we're seeing that this huge surge of cortisol following a traumatic event is very protective. And following this surge of cortisol is this big inflammatory response. And this inflammatory response is protective. And then it's got to resolve over time. But in these people that aren't recovering, there's no surge of cortisol that we're seeing in the data. There is no inflammatory response that we're seeing. So it's like their bodies aren't registering that this is a traumatic event that they need to respond to. And without that response, they're developing worse outcomes.
It is very interesting, yeah. There's just that inversion of the person that seems just fine, they've actually robusted a much, greater response to what occurred, right? And then we think of the person that has more going on with them. They weren't actually able to generate this protective response, right? And go through this phase where their body was like, hey, this happened. We got to do these things, right? So I don't know. I guess it's this inversion of what we're thinking about as like someone being steady and not as much going on versus like more going on, externally, but less of what should be going on internally.
Yeah, it's kind of a paradox in itself, and there's been a little bit of a paradigm shift to the past several years, and I think different aspects of this have been known for decades, but essentially when someone experiences a traumatic event, they're given NSAIDs, or they're trying to reduce their inflammatory response, because we have this idea that, maybe inflammation, it's a double-edged sword where there's this good aspect to it, but like too much inflammation for too long or not exerted at the right time, can also have harmful effects to it. So we're starting to really piece together this picture that it needs to be well timed. Like a cortisol surge needs to happen appropriately. And, maybe for some of these individuals that have had early life adversity and they don't respond to the car accident, maybe they respond when they drop a glass of water at home and all of a sudden they're scared that they're going to get yelled at. And, they clench up and it's like, I'm going to get yelled at right now. And maybe that's what causes them to release cortisol, even though they are in a safe space.
Like their calibration system, right?
What's safe and what's unsafe may be...
I'll say it, fucked up.
Yeah. It's not adaptive for them. So, yeah, I guess like all of that to kind of like go to answering like what's happening with this early life adversity and how does that shape our biology. And there's a lot of stuff that happens at the neurological level and within our nervous system. I am much less trained on that. I'm more focused on the immune system, but just from the data that I've worked with and data from many other researchers, there are these big dichotomies of what the immune system looks like in the people that are quote unquote healthy and the people that end up developing mental illness.
Yeah. Once upon a time, not too long ago, had someone say to me, trauma is cumulative.
Mm-hmm.
And I trusted this person. They were trained, and I took them at their word, and I was like, yeah, that's interesting. I'm going to have to look more into that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was true in my case. I'd had, I think, some traumas that occurred, and I was like, I'm fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a fresh one, right? And I think it touched upon some old ones that perhaps I hadn't resolved quite right.
Mm-hmm.
And then I didn't recover like a normal person from it. Or maybe I did, but this was the one that I finally ended up getting PTSD from, right? It was like the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. And so understanding, or I guess getting some insight here of what we're uncovering, why trauma is cumulative in terms of some tangible, objective reality, like biological outcomes that are occurring. It's fascinating. That's like coming full circle for me. And although we don't understand it all yet, I guess I'm not surprised. It makes sense. And at the same time, it's remarkable that we're at a level of technological understanding and sophistication where we can start really unpacking that.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of the reasons why I love this work, and I kind of love being in the trauma field, because there's aspects to it that are super empowering for someone that has lived through traumatic experiences and has had lived experiences with PTSD or chronic pain. Understanding that there is something that, like, my biological system, I mean, I'm also someone that has had cumulative trauma in my life and have had to work through.
I wonder what proportion of trauma researchers have some personal ties there. I mean, everyone has some trauma, but
I mean, I could imagine. I think there's a high level of people in our society that they're on the continuum of maybe complex PTSD in some way or another. But I think
mild, moderate, severe, right?
Yeah. But I think to be drawn to trauma research, you definitely have to be like an empathic person. You have to be like, you have to have a calling towards it in a way that's more than just, I want to work with this data. But yeah, it's just very validating, because I think so many people that end up with mental illness or chronic pain, PTSD, they feel like these outcomes are also quite untreatable in this population. Like, it ends up like you try to treat the chronic pain, but it doesn't really get better, or you try to treat the depression and it doesn't really get better. So like, I think people end up feeling very defeated, or like, why isn't my body responding to this new medication? Or I've been in CBT therapy for 10 years.
Or
like,
in just denial that anything's even wrong, right?
Exactly. So I think, and there's this like idea of, if you just have enough willpower, or if you can just make yourself healthy enough, or if you can just be a good enough person, that like maybe these things will just start to resolve themselves over time. But like, learning that like your biology is dysregulated in a way, or your biology was affected because of the way that you grew up, and that has impacted you your whole life, that kind of like shifts the narrative a little bit, and you can kind of move away from like shame-based and like guilt-based thinking.
Morality-based, right?
Yeah, or like
effort-based,
how do I be better? It's like, okay, how do I make my biology healthier? How do I shift my biology in a way that is conducive to me actually healing myself?
Like giving my body an actual chance to heal, right? Where the system isn't operating at less than its full capacity so much.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, it's such a hard thing. Like, for instance, like my mom has really struggled with chronic pain, and I don't even think that she connects the dots, even though I've presented my research to her a few times, that this chronic pain might be a manifestation of trauma that she's experienced in her life. And she just keeps going on like, how do I fix this? Or like, there's nothing I can do, or this is just something that I have to live with for the rest of my life. There is such this like
a level of acceptance of like, this is how it has to be, right?
Yeah, and like, maybe if there was like some level of understanding how that biology shifted, and that we have to think about it in a different way, and that the way that she responds to medications because of her trauma history might be different than someone who has low back pain because of a different reason.
So we're thinking about this study. Okay, people come into the ER, I take their blood, I'm looking for certain types of immune response signaling, right? Certain, I'm extracting RNA, I'm seeing what's going on there. Are there genes that are being upregulated, downregulated, right? I'm doing that at another time point after the trauma, seeing what are the changes here. I do it at another time point, I do it at a year, right? And then I look. which people are okay, which people are not,
Yeah.
and I backtrack that to the data, and I say, okay, how does this correlate, right?
Yeah.
I find patterns there. Stepping back from that, there seem to be patterns there, which is what
of
you're
course.
going to attempt to publish on.
Mhm.
In your head, where would you like to go with what you've been figuring out? Not that you need to be the person carrying it out, but like in an ideal scenario, like do you take something like somatic experiencing and then try to map it on to say what you figured out?
Yeah, I'll give two different answers here because I have a passion for somatic experiencing, so I'll keep that as my second response. And maybe that's something that I do down the line. But I think some more translational or active steps to kind of take from the findings that we've had within this research is one of the aspects of the research is we've been able to identify pharmaceutical compounds that induce the same transcriptional response or kind of induce the same molecular pathways that we see in the people that recover. And we know that these transcriptional responses and that these molecular pathways do not become activated in the people that don't recover. Can we activate these pathways for these individuals that are at higher risk so that way they can kind of move their biology or shift their biology towards a more recovery-like phenotype?
Like artificially induce the response that you know associates with people being okay after this
Yes,
happened.
you got it. Exactly that. And some of these compounds one of the main hot compounds that we've highlighted is glucocorticoid receptor agonist. So
What does that mean?
Yeah, so this is a compound that
Or a class of compounds?
yeah, it's a class. It's like a mechanism of action. So it's kind of like a class of compounds, and the main class, like this is your cortisol. So could we like give a cortisol shot or like give dexamethasone, which is a like derivative of cortisol, and
Which seems like counterintuitive. I know we've been discussing this a bit, right? But something bad happens, in common language or colloquial language, you wouldn't hear, hey, give him some cortisol.
yeah,
right?
exactly. That's kind of like the paradigm shift that we're working within right now because we know that chronically stressed people have higher levels of baseline cortisol. So what do you mean we should give them more cortisol following another traumatic, stressful experience?
Yeah.
But that's kind of where our research is like pointing in that direction of like, can we do this? And
Like a well-calibrated system actually mounts a robust response to something like this occurring, right?
Yeah, and we've also thought about what if we kind of like skip past the HPA axis and what if we just induce an inflammatory response? Like what if we go right to neutrophils? That's like your body's main immune cell type that kind of comes in and acts as like I'm here to defend you. Like if we can just like induce a neutrophil response and like promote this inflammatory response, which is part of this protective mechanism, and like maybe make sure that we can carry that inflammatory response to resolution, because that's another super important part. You can't just have an inflammatory response and never turn it off. You need to have this inflammatory response and it needs to be turned off at the right time.
I mean, it's the same phenomenon, right? If you keep that inflammatory response on for too long, you're not going to respond well when the next bad thing happens, right?
Yeah.
And you keep on inflammation or something like that for too long, what are likely outcomes? Like you're probably going to be in pain at some point, right? Or like
exactly. So yeah, we've kind of talked about that, and that kind of like fits right back into the paradigm. These chronically stressed individuals who are at higher risk of these adverse health outcomes also have higher levels of baseline inflammation in their body. So what do you mean you're going to go in and increase their inflammatory response? But that's where our research is really unique at being able to identify what are the key molecular players involved in this response, and at what time would we activate this response, and how would we make sure that we turn this response off at the correct time. Like there would be this whole like modulation of the response, and could this promote recovery in these individuals?
And with the data that you've been working with, how long does this robust response that initially after the trauma, how long seems ideal for that phase of things to be occurring? Because there comes a point, as we were saying, where you want to shift that off. You don't want to keep all that machinery on forever, right? But how long is that initial window?
I've got a hand wavy answer.
Okay.
So within the cohort that I'm working with, we have ED time point. So like right when they experience a traumatic event, what does their biology look like? And then we've got 2 weeks. So we can't have any more refinement than a 2-week time window to be able to understand what's shifting.
Detection.
Yeah, like we know what the body looks like at 2 weeks, and we know what the body looks like at 6 months. But by 2 weeks, we see that most of the inflammatory response is already resolved by 2 weeks, and actually by this 2-week time point, only in the people that recover, we see other homeostasis and repair pathways being activated. So by 2 weeks, there's been this robust inflammatory response, and then it's decreased, and then these other pathways have been activated to continue the recovery. So bringing your body back to homeostasis or a baseline level.
So basically, like, something happened, response, right? And then, like, okay, we're shifting out of this. We're aware something happened, right? But we gotta like adapt and like move forward.
Yeah, and like psychologically, you can kind of be like, I'm back in a safe place. I don't need to stay in this activated, inflammatory, or like stressful response. Like we can kind of like start to move away from that.
And working with blood, is there any interest or take like the idea of up in the brain? Is the inflammation you're seeing, say in the body, do you also see neuroinflammation? Like are microglia more active in the cohort that recovers versus not?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I personally don't do a lot with neuroimaging or processing samples, like brain samples, but there is a postdoc in Dr. Sarah Linnstaedt's lab, Dr. Lauren McKibben, who
have to bring him here.
Yeah, she did some really cool work where she kind of laid out this transcriptional landscape within a rodent model in mice, within rats and mice, what their biology looks like at the transcriptional level, 24 hours, 48 hours, and 72 hours after experiencing a single prolonged stressful experience.
Sure.
In a rodent model, what a stressful experience, or how we kind of invoke a stressful experience that might mimic a stressful experience within a human, is that we force them, or we have them in a restraint for 2 hours, so they can't like really physically move their body, and then we force them to swim for 20 minutes, and then we knock them out with ether.
Sounds like hell.
Yeah. I'm there's a reason I'm not on the animal side of the research, but
and there's a reason I'm not in academia right now.
Yeah, but this is it's a very well validated model of how to be able to study stress responses within rodent animals, and she's been able to kind of like map what are the genes that are getting turned on in the brain. So she looked at different parts of the brain. She also looked at like muscular tissue and different organs. So and within that study, she was able to see that like within the first 24 hours, stress signaling was active across most of the tissue types. She didn't look at blood. But if I had to imagine, if she did look at blood, she would see a pretty similar response. Then by 72 hours, most of the inflammatory signaling had turned on. And rodents are, of course, going to be very different than humans, but it was a good model to start to understand.
It's not nothing, though, right?
Yeah, no, it's a good model to start to understand, like, okay, what are the molecular pathways that are getting activated in response to a stress? And these are also in mice that were naive, so they didn't have any early life adversity. They had a good background.
Yeah.
They grew up well.
Resume looks good.
Yeah, exactly. So she's doing some cool work there to map those pieces together. And I know that there are some other studies. I believe I heard in a seminar that people correlate expression or RNA expression data within the brain to RNA expression data in peripheral blood, so a blood sample, and they're highly correlated. So while I wouldn't feel comfortable fully saying that what we're seeing in the immune system is what we would see in the brain, I think there's some good information out there that might suggest that.
Yeah. I mean, it's all connected, right?
Yes, yeah.
Which levers get pulled in which direction perhaps depends on where in the body you're looking, but, you would find some type of correlation, I would imagine.
Yeah, I like to, my new favorite word is psychoneuroimmunoendocrinology.
Okay.
And that's because you pull in the psychological aspect.
What was the third one?
Endocrinology.
Okay, yeah, I'm trying it again. But
Yeah. But it's like you're pulling in the psychological aspects or the self of your like psyche and emotions, and you got the neuroscience aspects. So what's the brain doing? What's the nervous system doing?
what's the just overall total body doing?
Yeah, and then they just made this huge long word for just like what's the body up to type of thing. But I think this kind of highlights how our systems have kind of siloed out different parts of studying biology, even though all of these pieces are super connected to each other. And especially in the face of a traumatic event, like your brain is talking to your body, to your immune system, to your hormones, and then that all affects the way that your emotions feel. And then your emotions go back to affecting your nervous system,
Vice
your immune
versa,
system.
like what your gut is doing, right? Most of the serotonin your body produces is in your gut, and what bacteria in there, and then how does that affect your brain?
Yeah, and I think that can be very overwhelming for people to kind of grasp that, and it's comfortable to kind of stay within your silo because that's what you know. But I think the field has definitely been moving more into the systems biology and trying to understand how all of this is connected.
Yeah, I remember when I first took biochemistry, and the complexity of how these systems operate within a living organism and the intricacy and the sophistication, I was just in total amazement. I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God, here is the result of billions of years of the slow chisel of evolution. And this is like the most magnificent sculpture, just every little tiny piece, right? It's very specifically designed.
Yeah, isn't it? It's really like awe-striking to me, and that your body, all it wants to do is protect you. Like all it wants to do is survive.
And it just does it.
And
Without,
it, like,
you don't even you need to understand it. It'll just do it.
and
right?
it'll just do it. And it's like even if those survival mechanisms at the biological level or the psychological level are not great for you in the long term, like your body's like, well, it's good enough, we're still alive, right? Like I'm keeping you alive. Like I don't know how to turn these systems off
It has
effectively.
a well thought out reason for whatever it's doing, and it's going to be an intricate response, right?
Yeah, and I think that's another piece that pulls in like why this can be validating and empowering to people is just like your body was trying to protect you. Like your body was doing the best it could with the resources that it had, and like it sucks that you're now dealing with these adverse health outcomes, but in the moment if it didn't respond like that, you may have been worse off. So I think there's this like level of once you can understand that you could maybe bring appreciation into your body and just show up with some compassion on a level.
Yeah, and I think finding the right balance to strike between like self-will and making better choices, right? Because a lot of people say that end up in a situation where they are in chronic pain, right? What becomes, much more likely to occur in that scenario is they're going to say take a substance to try and cope with the fact that they're in chronic pain. Or, I don't know, they're going to become a hermit in their home because they don't want to have to go out into the world and likely experience more pain, right? And so now they're socially isolated, right? And just like all these things are tied together, but where to draw the line in terms of what level of responsibility does the person have for the condition they are now in, right? Even if different things that perhaps were not their fault made it much more likely for them to end up in the situation that they're in now.
Yeah, I mean that's a loaded
There's no right
yeah,
answer,
that's a
but
loaded question. I think something, and it's going to be a quote of someone along the lines, but like you are not responsible for what happened to you, but you are responsible for your own healing, and especially if part of your trauma response is harmfully impacting the people around you, like you have to not keep inflicting pain on other people, or you have to kind of want that
to find a way to minimize suffering as a result of your own, maybe.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, I think about this a lot. I'm an empath at heart, so I really try to understand, and especially when it's like we can understand that people's biologies are just rigged and the way that they respond is just kind of like already determined before they even respond to a situation. But there are paths to healing, and people have to be willing to acknowledge their behavior and take accountability for their behavior and have a true desire to want to heal. But I can also understand how people that might be more avoidant or not wanting to address those things, or it's uncomfortable to go there to heal their trauma, or they don't have the time to go to therapy and like work through their issues.
I think, and perhaps you'll agree with me, it's very easy for me to imagine a different outcome than where I'm currently at in a really not good way, right? And in knowing that it probably wouldn't have been that hard to end up in a much less decent position that I'm currently sitting in knowing that it has helped me have compassion for other people that perhaps have not been as fortunate in their ability to recover, I'll say yet. But yeah, I guess having some humility there and understanding, like, it didn't have to be this way. I didn't have to be like sitting in this chair right now, right? Like in a position where I'm fortunate enough to interview someone, right?
Yeah, I think this kind of brings in the conversation of resilience, and like, is resilience something that is just innate to an individual? Are you born with a level of resilience? Are there things, or depending on when you experience certain traumas on your life, might impact your resilience a little bit more than another person? I think about this with myself, like, often, actually, because I think,
you?
yeah, like, why did I end up being in a position where I was able to heal and kind of like really face some of these hard things that I went through pretty head on? And I was doing that at a very young age. Like, I had a CBT workbook, and like it was like in a 3-ring binder that my therapist sent me home with. And I was,
story.
you know, like I was 12, 13 years old, and I was like going home, going through like, how am I gonna heal? You know, like it's crazy. And it's like, what in me at that age wanted to heal, or understood that the circumstances that I was in were going to have adverse outcomes on me if I didn't put in the effort.
You need to know your stuff, right?
And I think over time I've started to, like, is this a level of resiliency, or was it my trauma response of, like, you kind of think of like the 4 Fs: fight, flight, fawn, freeze. People with complex PTSD can kind of choose one of these Fs to be their dominant response. And I think at a young age mine was flight, and a mixture of like flight and fawn. So like,
that's where I went to in terms of the event that finally traumatized me. I either had to get out of the situation, or I had to learn how to act to keep things as okay as possible, right? That fawning response. And
yeah,
you know, I still see parts of that, right, in me now. This is something I've had to work through. But it's that exact point of, for the situation I was in, that was a response that helped me at the time, right?
Yeah, I think of that often, because it's like, as a child, I was growing up in just like a violent household with parents that are super unpredictable and just a very unstable dynamic. So like, the way that flight kind of showed up in my body was like, I'm going to be super successful. Like, I have to get good grades. If I want to get out of this dynamic and live a different life than this, like, I have to be successful.
I better take control of it as much as I can.
And like, I'm going to find the things that I can control, which like for me became controlling my body at a very young age. And like, there was even, I've thought about this recently, like, as I've been kind of trying to disentangle, like, what's my F response, and like, how did I respond to my experiences in childhood? And there was like even a time where I ran away. There was a situation where I was like, if we go in there, like, we're not going to be okay. Like, if we go into that house with my dad, we're not going to be okay. And my response was like, okay, then I'm going to run and I'm going to go find somebody to help us. Like, my flight response was very real. But then I also had a fawn response, where it's like, in order to stay safe, or in order to manage some of the highs and the lows of the bipolar that my mom was experiencing, like, I had to become very attuned to her and like know when was the right time to speak up about something, and when was it unsafe, when was it safe, to just kind of protect my emotional psyche.
Take the temperature of things, right?
Yeah, and like, I've struggled with a lot of unpacking these two things, and a lot of kind of like shame and guilt for, why was I so hard on myself? Like, why did I put all this pressure for my body to be a certain way, or to be at a certain level of success? Or how did I let people talk to me this way for so long, or treat me a certain way? Like, why can't I speak up?
Isn't it weird too, like, this dichotomy that it sounds like has been or was a large part of your life, in terms of, say, trying to control your body and control. I'm going to eat this. I'm going to work out like this. I'm not going to do that. I have really taken exquisite control over this aspect of my life. And at the same time, still being very, very capable of taking the back seat and letting others dictate how you should be, just in other dimensions of your life, right? That, like,
Yeah.
like, I mean, I think we're all walking paradoxes, but, you know, just that going on at the same time. And oftentimes I've had stuff like that too for me, and you don't even realize it at the time. It's only looking back that you're like, oh, there's just like asymmetry in me, right?
Yeah, it's really kind of, confusing. Like, I feel like it's been really hard for me to process these like two different dynamics, and I think too, like, when you are a super disciplined person, when it comes to how you eat, how you work out, how healthy you are, you get a lot of praise for that. And like the validation and praise that I would receive from people, like that hit a part of my brain that I,
Like I'm doing the right thing.
yeah, like
right?
I'm doing the right thing, or maybe like the praise that I wanted in childhood, like I'm getting it from all these people now when I'm doing this thing that's actually like super unhealthy for me. Like,
Yeah,
I'm
in terms
going,
of what it's doing to
like,
your psyche internally.
yeah,
right?
like I go home and eat a cookie and I'm crying,
Yeah.
but like someone's like, oh my gosh, the willpower you have for not eating that cookie when we were out at dinner is just like, you're so incredible. And I'm like, this is like,
It's like killing me inside.
yeah,
right?
and there's just like a level of disembodiment, because when you're telling yourself that this is what I need to do to be healthy, you stop listening to your own cues. Like, you don't like, if your body's not hungry and you're eating, because like that's when your meal was programmed to be eaten, or like you're starving but you can't eat because you're trying to lose weight, you're ignoring your body's like natural signals for what it needs. So like you're creating an even more unsafe place within yourself.
It also gets complicated. I mean, we were talking about this idea of resilience, and it's like, is resilience some like inherent trait? And when I think about it, I'm like, I think there are people more inclined to be resilient than others, right? But also at the same time, I think resiliency, it takes a form of courage, right? Of being able to say, no, we're not like going down this path anymore. I'm drawing the line in the sand here, right?
Yeah.
Even if someone else wants me to do otherwise. And like courage is a discipline. It is something that if you want to be a courageous person, you have to practice doing it, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't just, it's not going to come the time finally where you're in the hard situation and you're able to be courageous if you've never practiced that much, right? So I don't, it's just weird how it's all interrelated. Discipline, right, to not eat the cookie, and how that's like harming a person inside, and at the same time, like, is it training a capacity, right, of being able to be resilient, right, in certain ways? And
Yeah, it's such an interesting paradigm.
I went a long
like,
ways with the cookie analogy here.
No, but no, like I understand it, because it's almost like, is it maybe part of what people consider to be resilient on a societal level? Those are the people that are high functioning, that can keep a job, that get an education, that can interact with people. Like, there's this like level of what society expects for someone to maybe be resilient on the population level. And maybe there are certain F-types that are more designed, or like push people in that direction a little bit more, because you have people that maybe their response is dissociation, or that's their freeze response. They dissociate, they become scared, they don't want to leave their home, and like they become less interested in interacting with other people. Or you've got the fight response, and people become like more aggressive and develop characteristics that might just make it difficult to keep a job or to have stability. But if you fawn, people learn to enjoy you, and you are a more liked person.
you're great.
And
you
you
just
can
concede to them, right?
Yeah, and like that is good for what society thinks of you. And if you've got maybe this flight response and you're go, go, go. And I think flight response can like show up in this, you really want to be driven for success, but then there's also like the other side of it, that maybe more like the ADHD phenotype, where it's like the body is just constantly alert. It's in hyper arousal. It's like ready to go, but it doesn't know how to like let go of all of this energy. It's unresolved within the body.
Yeah.
And like that can have like different implications on what someone looks like in society. So, but at the molecular level, I think resilience looks different. If we looked at what someone's common, or what their most dominant F-type or their trauma response type is, does their biology look different in response to trauma?
What's your hunch?
Oh man,
If you just had to guess, my guess is that if you were able to look and find enough detail, there would be a signature, probably various subtypes within it, but there would be a signature that you could find of resiliency, of people that are able to mount certain biological responses when they feel threatened enough in one way or another, right? That then makes them more plastic or adaptable when they need to be, right? To be able to push back against something. I mean, push back, like do what they need to do in particular situations, right?
Yeah. I guess I do have a little bit of a hunch, but I have nothing to back this up by saying this.
You don't need to. It's all good.
But I would say that maybe like the freeze response or the dissociative response, like we're not going to turn anything in our body on because, or like we're going to turn it all, or I guess more I think in the freeze response is like your body turns everything on. And in most traumatic situations, you start with a freeze because you have to assess the circumstances and understand like what's my best route of action here to get out of this situation. And if none of those actions are safe enough, it's like I need to dissociate and I need to leave my body to be able to endure what's ever happening in this moment. I think that maybe lack of embodiment or systems just having to be like they get super jacked up and then they just get turned off, or like they have to be suppressed to be able to go into this freeze state. I think that might be playing a role in why people have dysregulated systems, especially in circumstances where people were children or like childhood trauma, where usually the only response that you have to stay safe is to freeze and is to dissociate because you can't fight back. You typically can't really run away. Like you can't.
And you can't take care of yourself at the end of the day, right?
Like so, it's what are you gonna do to be able to survive what your parents are doing to you or the things that they're saying to you? You're just going to turn your brain off and kind of daydream or completely black it out altogether.
It's also, I mean, it's terrible, right, that people experience such things, but it is really remarkable the brain's even able to do that. When it really doesn't have a solution, it can check out, right?
Yeah.
And it has impacts later on, yes. But I don't know. I used to hear about, people saying like full dissociation. Like I really can't remember that. And you hear it, and there's enough research. I'm like, I take it at their word, but it's like hard to conceive of, right? And then I finally did have something that traumatized me, and I did experience like true dissociation at one particular point for sure. And yeah, it has absolutely blown my mind in the wake of that happening, and I'm fine. But like of being like, oh my God, I was completely sober. I'm like an adult man, and I had this chunk of time where I'm like, I really don't even know what happened, right? It's crazy.
Yeah, I also have like and I think the dissociation is also kind of like a hallmark of complex PTSD, or like a sense of derealization, depersonalization.
Do we want to talk a little bit about complex PTSD versus just normal PTSD? Because we mentioned this a few times, and a lot of people probably aren't incredibly familiar with the differentiation there.
Yeah. So with
I'm happy to chime in too. So
yeah, I just want to say something about the dissociation thing.
Yeah.
Like one of the experiences that I had that was just like it blew my mind in undergrad. I was probably around 19 or 20, and I started having these moments where my hand would land on my arm and I would flinch because I didn't realize that it was my own hand being there. Like I was so not connected with my body that like I would see my like shoulder and my periphery and like I would flinch because I'd be like, who's right behind me? But it was just my body. So like there was just like such this disconnection between like who I am and what my body is and where I land in that. And I also had another like really interesting. I don't feel like I've ever like fully dissociated, where I don't remember things. Sometimes I wish maybe my childhood I would have dissociated a little bit more, but no, the memories are there. But there was a time where it was Minnesota. I was waiting at the bus stop. It was probably like sub 20 degrees. It was cold. It was snowing, and I had probably reached a level of burnout. And I was standing at the bus stop waiting for my bus to come, and I watched my bus go by 3 times before I actually got on. Like, I just, like, stood out there, like, kind of, like, frozen in spot, no pun intended, and just was like, oh, I'm supposed to be getting on a bus right now. Like, it's cold outside. What am I doing just standing here? And just having this, like, what am I doing? Or kind of just feeling like I'm living somebody else's life.
Yeah.
Like,
I remember there were times where when I was younger and I'd gone through some substance abuse stuff at this point, I'd be sober, but I would like look at my hands and I'd be like, these don't like feel like my hands, right? Like that type of thing. And then there's dissociation, say in something in PTSD, whatever form you want to talk about. Then there's something like flashbacks. And prior to my diagnosis, for whatever reason, I always considered flashbacks as like almost like cartoonish in a way, like, oh, they're not here anymore. Like they're like back in Vietnam or something, right? Yeah. And now I've actually experienced with what a flashback is, and I'm sure there's some variation person to person, but it's not like I'm not totally back there. It's more like I'm daydreaming, but in the worst way. And it brings out very intense,
Yeah.
it's daydreaming, but about things that actually did happen. And it is like you're right there, but I don't know exactly how to explain it. It's like terrible, terrible daydreaming that was real.
Yeah, I think I might have a little bit of language for this. I was reading the book. It's written by Pete Walker. It's called Complex PTSD, Surviving to Thriving. And he referred, like, in complex PTSD, maybe we'll come back to defining this.
Yeah.
But he kind of explains that it's common for people with complex PTSD or this, like, prolonged exposure to a traumatic situation or like kind of a cumulative exposure where there wasn't really a safe way to get out of it. And for these individuals that experience this level of prolonged, continuous traumatic exposures, the flashbacks don't necessarily look the same for them as someone that might have what we traditionally think of as PTSD, like someone that's at war and a bomb goes off and now every time they hear a loud noise, they're triggered by it. But rather, he calls them emotional flashbacks, where you might not have the specific memory that pops up, but there's this inherent emotion that comes through. And the example that he used in his book was like someone had dropped a glass of water on the floor, and even though he was home alone, he immediately went back into an emotional flashback, and he kind of started telling himself that he was stupid and unworthy and how dare he break a glass, and like now he can't go out with his friends because like he's just such an embarrassment. And
It's so
like,
weird too, like unless you're well trained in what is going on with you, once those pathways get fired, it's like the train is on the track. You're along for the ride,
And you kind of got to ride that like emotional flashback back. Cause it's not like in that moment, he wasn't seeing pictures of his dad's face or like certain circumstance. It was the accumulation of being reprimanded for accidents all the time and being told that he was a terrible person or unworthy of love or that he's gonna get some level of physical punishment because he made a mistake.
I mean, yeah, you go back to thinking and conceptualizing of yourself as if you were back in that time period, right?
Yeah, and this has been such a struggle with me, like with my own experience too, because there's a level of rationality that I have at this point with my healing journey. Like I can understand why I might be thinking a certain thing, or like in my fawn response, it's like I should say something right now, but my body like is physically like repulsed by the idea of saying something. Like I just can't get myself to say something, and it's like frustration. And there's like this like shame and guilt of like, why can't I just be better? And it's like this is also a very like core part of complex PTSD is this like inner critic that just wants to come for you at all times and just kind of be like, well, if you know it, why aren't you doing it? Because now if you're not doing it, like what does that say about you if you know something and you're not doing anything about it? Like
the number of times I have said over the last decade, I understand this, but I don't feel this.
Yeah.
Right? That the disconnect there. Yeah, fortunately, PTSD-wise, the I understand to I feel it, right? A lot of it has gotten a lot better over the last couple of years. Still obviously a work in progress, but yeah, I should say I get it.
Yeah, this is kind of rounding back to somatic experiencing and why that's been such a healing mode of therapy for me, because it kind of takes the intellectual thinking out of it a little bit. And within my own experience, I had to develop a level of safety within myself, a level of safety with the therapist that I work with of like, okay, and I guess let me kind of define what somatic experiencing is a little bit. It's this therapeutic process where instead of necessarily going and retelling and rehashing a traumatic event, you can kind of like tune into your body, and when the therapist guides you with a question, you say, like, you kind of ask yourself, and the therapist will ask you, like, where do you feel this in your body? And what emotions kind of like come up with this? Or if this were to happen, like, how does that make you feel? And it's less about trying to rationalize your way through a response versus like, how do we actually like move this response through your body? So like there was a period of time where like every session I was just crying, and like there was just so much like so many tears that I never let myself actually release, that just like was coming out. And it's like after this release of energy in the form of tears for me, like I would feel so much better. Like I would feel a sense of lightness in my body. Over time, you start to become more, I think that we use like the word embodied. You start to feel more within yourself. You can listen to your cues within yourself a little bit more. Like I am hungry, so I'm going to eat now. Or like I feel constriction in my throat because I feel disgust about something. Sometimes I can't even let things be around my neck because like it'll just like something out, like a thought will come up and I'm like, oh my gosh, like the level of constriction that I'll feel. And these feelings within your body start to become signals, and it's like, okay, my heart is racing. What am I feeling right now? Like what is causing my heart to race? And maybe it's nothing, or maybe it's because I just got worried that
Sometimes
I said
it's
something.
like a real mystery. Like something happens and I'm trying to pin down why is this happening, right? But
And sometimes you don't need to know, and you can just like let the heart race, and
Just let
maybe
it
you
ride.
dance it out a little bit, or maybe you sit down and do some breathing. But like maybe that's just like a surge of energy that got triggered by something that you don't even need to be aware of. But it's processing, and this is where I really like the idea of like trauma is a process within our bodies. And if that trauma goes unresolved, whether it's at the inflammation level or the hormone level, or whether it's at this way that maybe traumatic experiences are stored within our nervous system and the way that our brains will reprocess the same thing over and over again, if we can find a way to reroute that energy and to like let that energy release from our body, whether that's through movement, through sound, through regulation, through tears, can we move our body biologically into a state that allows for recovery to happen?
and can we find the signature of biologically why has somatic experiencing worked for someone like you, right?
Yeah, and that's where this is where I don't know if there's labs like this that exist, or maybe I'll have to look more into it, or maybe anyone that's listening and knows, you can reach out to me. But I think if we can start to understand what are the molecular signatures that are associated with recovery, can we see if someone goes through somatic experiencing, we can take a blood sample before they start somatic experiencing. We take a blood sample, the day of, and then we take a sample 2 weeks later, 6 months later, because somatic experiencing, it's a slow process. You have to titrate. You can't just jump into it and be like, I've got stored energy, I need to release it all in one session. It's not going to work like that. But like, is there a way that we can map on like your biology is moving in a way that promotes recovery, or like your inflammation's starting to decrease, or your cortisol is balancing out?
You're on a good trajectory here.
Yeah,
right?
like things are starting, like can we show that it has modulating effects at the biological level?
I also think, I guess I have two thoughts here. A lot of various forms of therapy in one way or another, it's not a linear journey.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times you're like, is anything even happening? Am I even getting better? And it's only usually when I look back over big chunks of time and I'm like, oh, I'm a lot better, right? That's when I can see it, but not so much in the moment. It kind of feels like confusing and like, is anything even happening type of thing. But if you had biological correlates that were showing like, yeah, you're actually moving in a good direction, right? Even if it doesn't feel like it, like that one would be helpful. And two, if you know the biological correlates, it also brings, with it, maybe there are new treatments, right? That bring about these biological correlates that we could try out that probably would have efficacy if we can do some predicting there as far as what might make those biological correlates happen.
Yeah, you're asking all the questions that I'm very excited to answer, actually. I think about this from my own position of doing probably like 10 years of like talk therapy and cognitive reasoning and trying to analyze certain aspects of why I'm healing, why I'm not healing, and then moving into this more body-based therapy. What do I feel in my body? How do I process it? But I am in a very privileged and fortunate position where I have healthcare that allows me to go see therapists, and that my healthcare and my therapist currently somatic experiencing might not be covered by all insurance companies because it's not as proven per se as
Sure.
maybe like CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy. So I feel very fortunate that not only do I have access to healthcare that allows for these things, I've got access to time, I've got access to energy, to like internal motivation to want to be able to do these things. And not everyone has those aspects to their life. So like, is there a way that we can find a pharmaceutical, and maybe it is like some level of a glucocorticoid receptor agonist, or inducing cortisol, or maybe inducing an inflammatory response that promotes recovery for these people that don't have the same privilege as I do. And I think of my mom in this situation too, where she has chronic low back pain, she's got autoimmune disease, she has inflammation throughout her body. I don't think she's going to take the time to sit down and do somatic experiencing and be like, where do I feel this in my body and how am I going to move through this?
Yeah,
She's not going to yoga.
Got a lot of noise before that, right?
Yeah, and she's on a lot of different medications to be able to manage these things, and she's even made comments about she's learned everything possible in therapy. Like, what's the point of going back? Because she already knows everything and it doesn't work. But so I want to is there right? Yeah, like it doesn't work for me. But like, is there a way that we could induce a recovery response for her? And at least maybe it's not a full level of recovery, but like, can we at least shift her biology in a little bit of a way where she's not in so much pain that she doesn't want to move? Or can we shift her biology in a way that her depression alleviates a little bit, or her bipolar alleviates a little bit, so that way she might be more motivated to do these other aspects of healing, like be more open to different therapy types. So I don't think that one therapy type is going to be the end-all, cure-all, and there's a combination of levels of pharmaceuticals and, wanting to put in the work yourself type of thing.
People are also different. Right?
Yeah, and
you need different things at different times.
Exactly, and every person's therapy and every person's trauma response, every person's lived experience is so unique to them, and how that affected their biology is a unique signature. So even though we're using population genetics and we're using these cohort designs, we're still grouping people together and taking their averages, to create an association, or to be able to like test these different biological correlates.
Everyone's got their own, flavor, right?
But still, like within those groups, and even within the people that recover, they're all going to have some level of unique signature that's unique to themselves. It's their fingerprint, is their lived experience, and how that got stored in their body.
Yeah, what are the subgroups within, what seems to be a common response, right?
And
this makes me think of, in Finding Nemo, where they're like swimming along the current.
Right? Oh, yeah.
But like different turtles within it are doing different things.
Right? I like that analogy. Yeah, I think we need to understand these subgroups and who responds, or what group responds best to which type of treatments, who are more resistant to different treatments, which group would benefit the most from putting money into the exploration of a new therapeutic target, and what would that therapeutic target be? Yeah.
Well, every episode, I've been having the previous guests ask a question to the next guest.
Oh, okay.
So, it's now your turn to participate in this.
Okay.
So there's a jar here.
Oh, I like this. Why do I feel scared?
Scared.
My heart is racing. I'm starting to clam. Those are my physiological symptoms to this moment. Okay. This question is from Dr. Carla Sharp, and it says, if you have been exposed to significant trauma, does that mean you are hardwired forever? My immediate response wants to be like, hell no. Like, I feel like that would be such a... That'd be such a tough way to look at life, to assume that the trauma that you experienced is going to have this everlasting negative impact on you, even though I'm sure many trauma survivors do feel that way. I do want to believe that there is a level of plasticity to our biology that when we give it the right circumstances and conditions, that we can shift it in a way that promotes recovery. And I think this can happen at multiple different levels, whether that's at the nervous system level, at the transcriptomic level, at the immune system level, hormone level, epigenetic level. I think there's lots of unexplored areas to the biological trauma response that as we keep uncovering them, we're going to show that people aren't hardwired into this destiny of PTSD or chronic pain for the rest of their lives. And I think I refuse to believe that would be the truth.
That's your answer. So,
Yeah.
Is there anything else, that you would like to share with anyone listening? Where can they find your work? If they were to get one thing out of listening to this, what would you want them to know?
Okay, first I'll start with the easy part. Yeah, so I'm a PhD student at the University of North Carolina, and I'm a student in Dr. Sarah Linnstaedt's lab. So I'm sure in the show notes somewhere you're going to have a link to my lab website, and you'll be able to find all the information that our lab does and some of the work that I talked about today. And as far as what would I want the main thing for someone to take away from this is that I really believe that like trauma is a biological process that is internalized. It's not the event that happened to you. You are not the traumatic event, but your trauma continues to live inside you. And until that moves through resolution, you're going to experience different symptoms. And sometimes you might not even be aware of those symptoms, or you might be kind of disconnected or avoidant or don't want to acknowledge that they're there. But as you bring awareness to them, then you can bring healing into your body. And whether that be through somatic experiencing or whether that be through a pharmaceutical that we're currently trying to translate from the science that the science that we're working on and other researchers, just like know that there are paths to healing and that it's a molecular process and your body is just doing its best to try to protect you and keep you living.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah.
And yeah, we'll
Thank
wrap.
you. This is great, Mitchell. Yeah, I had a blast.
Yeah.
Yeah.